Usually it's so you can hear yourself to make sure you're
I'm going to make sure we're on YouTube.
okay.
I know last time we were having issues with that, but
Oh, yeah.
hopefully now.
There's always you can hear yourself to make sure. Always a little bit of an issue. It's the way it goes. YouTube does have a pretty steep delay on it.
At least 15 seconds.
Oh, usually it's so you can make sure you're. Yep. Okay.
It says we're live.
Yep. So we're live, and this is what it looks like right there. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Tonight we're chatting with my father, Craig Anderson, who is a part of the Sons of the Utah Pioneers, the 20 Wells chapter. And 20 Wells is the kind of the original name of Grantsville, or one of the original names of Grantsville. And he runs a museum down in Grantsville that's dedicated to the Donner Reed Party. And if you're not familiar with the Donner Reed Party, we're going to do a quick introduction into the museum, where it's located, how you can get a hold of him, and set up to go down and do a tour. He enjoys giving them. It's not a burden on him. So if you want to go down there and see it, please reach out to him. But we're going to kind of let him introduce himself and what he does down there, and tell us a little bit about the Donner Reed Party.
All right. Well,
come into the mic just a little bit closer.
A little closer. I'm a member of the 20 Wells chapter, the Sons of Utah Pioneers. We chose that name because that was the name of the area that's now Grantsville. Was given that name back in 1827 by Jedediah Smith, first one to pasture there and write about it. And then when Lansford W. Hastings led the wagon trains on his shortcut to California, they referred to it generally just as the wells. But there was natural upwellings of water there that were fresh, cold, pure water, good grass around it. It was the last real resting place before you hit the desert. So it was of significance. And then when the first Mormon settlers came in 1850, they changed the name, and they called it the Willow Creek Settlement. And it would be that for a few years until they had trouble with the Indians, and George D. Grant and some militia was sent out to settle the issue, and he overseen the building of a fort, and everybody called it Grant's Fort, and kind of in his honor, it became Grantsville. It's been that ever since. And our chapter, we're a fairly recent chapter. We're only about 16, 17 years old now. And we took on the Donner Reed Museum about 10, 12 years ago, and we've managed it. Prior to that, it was somewhat managed by the daughters, but they got their own museum in the basement of the J. Reuben Clark home. And so we took that one on. The history of the building is something. It was originally constructed as a schoolhouse inside of the old fort. By many, it's considered the oldest continuously used adobe structure in the territory. Was used as a schoolhouse till about the 1880s, and then it was a city meeting hall. And then in early 1900s, it was converted into a auto repair garage, and it served as that on the Lincoln Highway for a number of years. And the grounds around it were listed as a traveler's rest. And in late 30s, it just was storage. And then in the late 40s, early 50s, some gentlemen that were spearheaded by J. Reuben Clark purchased the property, restored it, and donated it to Grantsville as a museum. Now, the Donner Reed stuff was brought in out of the desert in the 1920s and late 1920s by some guys from Grantsville, the Durfee brothers, a couple of oars from Skull Valley, and a gentleman associated with the University of Utah, Charles Kelly. And they were originally in the upstairs of the old high school. It was on Main Street in glass cases. I remember him as a young feller seeing those. And then when they built the new school and tore that one down, they relocated things to the Grantsville Museum, and that's when it became the Donner Reed. It's been that ever since. And that's kind of the centerpiece of our museum. is the artifacts from the Donner Party. We have the largest collection of actual artifacts from that party that brought in off the desert, from the wagons that were abandoned out there. That was in 1846. So it's some interesting stuff, and the artifacts even tell a little bit of a story that we like to share with you. Now, there's myself and generally 3 or 4 other gentlemen that do tours, so we try to have somebody available just about any day of the week, any reasonable time. We do try to be open on Saturdays through the summer when it's possible. Now, this coronavirus that everybody's dealing with has put a dent in everybody's plans, but we've tried to work around it. So we can generally accommodate anybody that wants to come and see the items we have. And we have a lot of other interesting things. It's just artifacts from early Grantsville and things that are of interest that way.
Is there anything left of the fort?
No,
The schoolhouse is.
the schoolhouse and the church were inside of it. The walls, it encompassed about 4 acres. The walls were made out of mud and adobe, what they call rammed earth. They were approximately 6 feet thick at the bottom and 2 to 3 feet thick at the top and 14 to 16 feet high. They had gun slots in them. Was fairly well thought out, but they never had to hang the gates because they made peace with the Indians. And once that was established, there was no need for the fort. And after a few years, everybody moved out and established farms. And the adobe that they built the fort out of and mud was used elsewhere. We do know about where the walls were. We've established that. The old First Ward Church is now a private reception center.
Or
They do receptions, and it's also a residence part of it. And they do dinner theaters and a lot of things like that in there. It's very good use. It and our schoolhouse were both dedicated in 1861. It's indicated the school was put into use sometime before that, but they built them simultaneously. But the church was quite a larger building, so it was a little more time and didn't get done quite as soon. And we just a couple of years ago had some major renovation work done on our building. State of Utah helped us out in the county, and it's quite expensive because it is adobe, and they restored and preserved as much of the adobe structure as possible.
That is interesting. I always wanted to go into an adobe building.
They did a real good job, and it's a really neat building and how it's built. And then there's some outbuildings, there's a blacksmith, there's a little house.
There's an original cabin from 1853 that a gentleman named Clark built for his sister, and they say she lived in it up into the 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
And it was moved there in the 1960s. There's what's left of a blacksmith shop, part of one. We have some old blacksmith items in it. We're still in the process of arranging that display. And it was to the east of where our museum is. When I was a young man, I went down there with my dad and grandpa, and it was storage buildings for the Rio Grande Lumber Company that was located there.
Mm.
And then when they did away with that, they salvaged what they could of the old blacksmith shop and moved it down there. It's interesting to look at the log work on them that was done.
Is it a blacksmith shop that can be actually utilized with a little?
Not currently.
No.
I don't think it has a forge in it, does it?
We don't have a set forge. We have an original bellows and a couple of the hand crank blowers and some other items in there of note. Currently, there's a scale that come out of the old co-op that's in there, and some several old Jackson forks from around town, and just some items like that, and a couple of harnesses that were show harnesses off horses that, by indication we have, were with the last horse-drawn hearse they used in Grantsville.
Yeah, and those harnesses are really neat. They're
in good shape.
They're impressive. The work, I've always thought that the work that's gone into tack has been really impressive. The leather work and how they stuffed them and formed them. And you can go in and see them, and they're on cage horses, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah, they display.
They're not saw horses like you'd see normal tack on. It's a cage.
They're displayed as they would be put on a horse.
Yeah, and it's really neat down there.
I like to show the young people the work it would have taken to harness up, catch a horse, harness it up, and hook it to a wagon before you could go anywhere. Today, you get in a car and push a button, and you're on your way.
Yeah.
How long does it take from start to finish?
Well, it depends. Depends on the temperament of the horse first.
Yeah, that's
And how good the guy putting the tack on is.
that's primary, the temperament of the horse.
I've known guys that could harness up their horses in 5 to 10 minutes, and other times you could spend an hour chasing and wrangling the horse and fighting with it. That was the interesting part of horses, just like saddling up a horse.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting video.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, saddling up a horse can be a rodeo in and of itself,
yeah.
especially if a horse that isn't ridden regular.
Well, without giving away too much of the story, tell us a little bit about the Donner Reed party.
Well, tell us first why they wanted to come out here.
Well, that's all plays into it. James Reed and the two Donner brothers were in Springfield, Illinois area. They were wealthy men. The Donner brothers had sold property and had some considerable finances. And James Reed had owned a furniture factory and cabinet making business. And he had sold out, and they intended to go to California and start over. Now, the Donner brothers, I believe, just had heard of the good farm ground that was out there, and it was a great opportunity. James Reed had intentions of setting up a mercantile, a store. Now, reading journals of the time, I suspect that part of the East was a lot like it is today, the place you want to get away from.
Mm-hmm.
People were leaving, kind of like California.
Yeah.
They're leaving in droves, is today.
Yeah, I've read there was a couple reasons. It was kind of overpopulated. All the good land was gone.
Well, they'd had a lot of ahu and malaria and
Yep.
stuff.
Meningitis was
Cholera
tearing
was
through.
common.
Yeah.
And people just wanted to leave. Some people that had tuberculosis was heading for a better climate, but they decided to leave. But they were wealthy people. James Reed, his mother-in-law insisted on going on. I've read several different reasons for that, but she insisted. So he took the time and built an elaborate wagon they called the palace car for her. And it was on an extra heavy-duty chassis and had berths in it and a cook stove. And there's even one account that had a small piano in it. Had a door in the side. Took anywhere from, depending on the terrain, 4 to 8 oxen to pull it. Slowed them down.
And when you go down to the museum, you can actually see the yoke off of that, one of the axle hubs. I mean,
Yeah, we have parts.
off of that.
We have parts that, now not everybody agrees with that, but I agree with Charles Kelly and others that those are parts from that wagon.
Well, it's the size difference is,
Yeah, that's the key to us, is they're unusually large.
yeah, very, very large compared to the other axles. And there's a few wagons down there. You can go down and see some.
They're not from the Donner Party.
They're not from.
They're early Grant.
There are a few Grantsville wagons. You can go down and and see kind of working wagons. They don't use them for much, but once in a while, get out and pull them around.
But the Donner Party, they were the last to leave in that season of 1846, of which it was registered 460 wagons leaving St. Joseph, St. Louis, Missouri area. There was probably quite a few that didn't register. So there's a lot of wagons on the road, and they were bringing up the rear. Little sad epitaph. James Reed's mother-in-law died in what today's Nebraska, and they spent a whole week having a funeral for her.
Mm.
So they were behind time. So when they got word on the trail that Hastings was promoting a shortcut that he would guide them through, they jumped at it. Sadly, it was a wagon road that Hastings had never been on himself, and it had never seen a wagon.
Yeah,
And it was quite trying. and it turned out to be about 120 miles farther.
Yeah, the usual route they would ride out, come out through Wyoming. Am I correct? And then
Well,
on up
yeah,
and
they
then
would
follow
all
the
of them. The Oregon
Columbia.
Trail came through central or southern Wyoming, what today's Wyoming, and then it went up to Soda Springs, Idaho,
Mm-hmm.
and then to Fort Hall, and it basically followed the Snake River country into the Oregon Territory and dispersed from there. Most people would spend the winter in Oregon and then go south to California in the spring. Problem with that is most people got to Oregon and says, this looks pretty good. I don't think we're going anywhere.
Yeah.
They settled. There was a few would take the cutoff south, depending on which one you took. There was a couple, one come down through the City of Rocks, and others dropped down from Fort Hall to the headwaters of the St. Mary's River. Today it's the Humboldt, and the trail followed that across and over. At the time it's called Truckee Pass. Today it's Donner Pass.
Mm-hmm.
But Hastings promoted a route that had been ridden the year before by John C. Fremont in his last exploration. And he was the first one to cross the salt flats, where he crossed her mud flats, but he crossed that and told about it. So Hastings had heard there was this passage through there. He had heard from the mountain men before that there was a trail shortcut south of the Great Salt Lake.
So he actually took a wagon through the salt flats while it was muddy.
Didn't Hastings go
no.
through the year after on a horse?
Yeah, he did. See, Fremont was headed west, and the great story was from the crest of the Cedar Mountains. He told his chief scout, who was Kit Carson, I understand there's water on that mountain in the distance. Take a couple of men and some pack animals and pilot to that mountain. If you find good water, send up a signal fire, and we'll come across. If you can't find any water, you'll just have to get back as best you can. And they made it across, and Fremont started across the next day. And when he seen the signal fire, he knew where to go. Now, he was pulling a small light cannon,
Mm-hmm.
and it did have two wheels, but there was no wagon on it. And then Hastings had written the definitive guidebook, Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. A fantastic book. All the immigrants would use it. Even the Mormons would depend on that book to some extent. And there's one, it's not even a paragraph, just 2 lines in the back of the book where he mentions that he's heard tell of a shortcut that goes south of the Great Salt Lake. And that give emphasis. And then he headed east in the spring of 46 with a group of men. His chief guide was a scout and an old mountain man named James Hudspeth. And they would lay out the trail that he would guide the other wagons on. Now, the first group to come in that year was the Bryant Russell party. And they had ditched their wagons, sold them in Wyoming, and were just on horseback with pack animals. And Hudspeth had them go down and took them down the Weber River. He knew the country well, and that's the flattest route through the Wasatch. But there's 2 real bad narrow points. Devil's Slide at the top and the Devil's Gate at the bottom. Some journals refer to it as Hell's Gate. And then the largest wagon train was called Harlan Young. And I should say that Edwin Bryant wrote a book. He wrote, actually, there's 2 volumes of it. And it's What I Saw in California. And the first one, he keeps a daily journal of his travels from St. Louis to California. And he was there for the Bear Flag Rebellion and wrote about it. And his travels across the West are really interesting. It's an interesting book to read. And a little interesting fact is they had a lot of contact with the local Indians. And they believe it's because it was just 12 men on horseback with pack animals. The Indians tended to avoid wagon trains, just the sheer number or the women with them or something.
Mm-hmm.
But traveling on horseback had its own challenges because you're very limited on what you can take with you, your supplies. But the second group was Harlan Young, and Hudspeth brought them down the Weber. But it's at Devil's Slide, they had to lead their livestock up around the hills and manually bring the wagons down the riverbed. And if you drive that highway through Weber Canyon, you'll notice it's real narrow, and especially that point. And then when they got to the mouth of the canyon, they had to build a derrick and lower the wagons down through the ledges and over the cliffs.
Mm.
to get into the valley.
What is a derrick?
I don't. It's like a crane.
Yeah, it's a hand crane.
Well, it's a post with a pulley system, and they would use oxen to operate the pulleys and lower them down through the ledges. And it's reported the ropes broke on one of them, and the wagon and all the oxen went over the ledge and were just smashed up and lost. And it killed all the oxen. They said pretty grisly. So it was not an easy thing. You come out the mouth of that canyon today, and it's still narrow and rough right through there.
It is.
And then the third group was the Lingard Company, and that's who Hastings was traveling with. And they came down it, and they had light wagons and were well manned, so they didn't do too bad. And he left a note at the mouth of the canyon for the Donner Party that they found when they got to that point. And the thing is, they had never met Hastings. They had not yet seen him because he had left Fort Bridger before they got there. But they'd spent a few days in Fort Bridger and had refitted, resupplied, had reported even picked up some fresh oxen, trade oxen. That was why Jim Bridger and his partner Vasquez were promoting this trail, was it meant a lot of trade for them and business. And it was a big thing for them. And they found that note at the mouth of Echo Canyon. It said, your wagons are too heavily laden and large to make this trek. Another route will have to be found. James reported it was a punch in the gut. And they ended up having to build a road up the backside of the Wasatch from about where Hennifer is today, up the East Canyon Ridge and over Big Mountain and then over Billy's Mountain and then down Immigration Canyon. And it's quite a feat in itself. And they were not only had heavier wagons and a fairly sizable herd of livestock, but they were undermanned. They didn't have enough able-bodied men for the number of old people and women and children that were in the party.
Now, weren't wagons generally built to the same dimensions, the same width on those?
Yes. Yeah.
And his mother-in-law's wagon was
built to that same width.
Was it the same
width? It was
width?
close to the same width. It was just everything was bigger and heavier.
Yeah, coming closer to the mic, Dad.
Bigger and heavier. In
so
size.
the width was okay. It was just the.
And people don't realize a wagon road at that time was not like we build a road today. They didn't have a D8 cat to push a flat road. They dug a trench on the uphill side and cleared what was between them so that the wagon could ride as level as possible, and the uphill wheel and animal would walk in that trench. And there's still some places in East Canyon where those trenches are visible. And then I like to go out. We did it this spring. You go out in Skull Valley and over the Cedar Mountains and then out onto Grayback. And there's still 8 or 10 places you can still see the wagon ruts or the trenches of those wagon roads from 1846. Because stuff doesn't go away real quick out in that desert.
No.
It kind of hangs around. And
Nice.
to see what they went through to cross that is just amazing. But they did, and they got to 20 Wells, today Grantsville, and all the parties would rest there for 3 days, let their livestock rest up and prepare for the trek ahead. And then they would head and then go out around the end of the what didn't have a name then, but today it's the Stansberry Mountains, and down as far as today it's Ensign Ranch. Another interesting thing to go see is Josefa, where the Hawaiians live, the Kanakas. They would have that area, but they go down there where they called it Good Hope Wells. And that's where the Donner Party found a note from Hastings. They said the birds had pecked it apart, but they put it together enough to read. It said, 2 days, 2 nights, hard drive, 40 miles, next good water. Well, Hastings not being known for being long on the truth, it's closer to 80 miles, and it took them the better part of 4 days. They run out of water and fodder for their animals in 2. Not to mention the obstacles that lay in their way. Getting up and over the Cedar Mountains was not an easy task. There's a really good spot in Hastings Pass. You drive up a road to the south and you can see where the wagon road was cut coming from the east, and then the dugaway going down the west side that was the wagon road is still there. It's still visible. And then there's another dugway further down. And then they went on out, and from a distance, Grayback doesn't look like much. But when you get close to it, they had a real steep 200 or 300 yard ascent to the top, And when they got to the top, they started down the west side, and it was in the dark, and it's strewn with big, large, black volcanic boulders that you wouldn't see in the dark. That was just horrible to get through. And after you get off that, then there's about, 10, 15 miles of sand dunes. And after that, then you hit the mud flats. And they get out on the mud flats 2/3 of the way across. The Harlan Young party in the lead had wagons break through the crust, and they got stuck in the mud. But they were in good order and well organized, and they took their livestock on to Pilot Springs. Today it's called Donner Springs. Rested them for a couple of days and went back and double and triple teamed all the wagons out of the desert and went on to California, and no one's really ever heard of them. They're just a footnote in history. The Lingard party was in light wagons, well manned, and they went across and didn't report much trouble at all. And then the poor ill-fated Donner party had run out of fodder and water when they got to that point. Their wagons broke through, but half their livestock either died or run off crazed with thirst into the desert, never to be seen again. Now, nobody died out there, but when they stumbled into Pilot Springs over the next 2 days, they were in pretty tough shape. And they abandoned, depending on which account you read, between 5 to 7 wagons out there in the mud flats. Reason was they didn't have anything to pull them with. There's no reason to pull them in. Now, we believe that one of them was that family palace car. And,
If something was to be abandoned, it'd probably be something like that.
well, scholars say now Virginia Reed wrote the most famous book, Trial by Hunger, and she talks about abandoning the family wagon in Nevada, today's Nevada, just before they got to the Humboldt. Well, I think that was another wagon, because she also said that when they come out of the desert, their family wagon was being pulled by an oxen and a milk cow. I don't see any way an oxen and a milk cow could pull that palace car. And then in 47, there was a detachment of Mormon battalion members on their way to Salt Lake from California, and they used that route. And it was late in the season, I believe late September, and they got caught in a storm. And the one journal, the guy said, we come upon an unusually large wagon that was cached full of supplies and in the mud. And he said in his journal that we were in sore need of the supplies, and we burned a lot of the wagon to weather the storm. And then in 1850, Captain Stansberry, who did the first full survey around the Great Salt Lake in the country, he reported seeing wagons out in the desert, and noted one of them was unusually large in size, what was left of it.
Mm.
And so that's some of the reasons we believe that's the wagon parts that we have.
Wouldn't it be cool to have a photo of that, you know?
Yeah.
They had photographs then, and you just had to sit still for
A long time.
what was it, like 90 minutes to get a photo done? So you brought in some. Now, I don't want to tell the full story, and I don't want to tell any more of the Donner Party story from here. I want you guys to call my dad. His number will be in the show notes, or you can just ask for it. He'll gladly take you on the tour.
With a little bit of luck, it'll be transferred to my cell phone, because the windstorm we had the other night knocked my phone straight to
Okay,
south.
I'll put his cell phone number in the show notes, and you can give him a call, or you can give the 20 Wells chapter, the Sons of the Pioneers.
There's a website.
Yeah,
and
I've
our-
got the
our
website pulled
numbers
up.
show up.
Yeah, but the phone number on the website's his old one.
I've got a couple of books I brought along. The one that they're two of them by Charles Kelly. One is called Salt Desert Trails. It has some beautiful pictures, and it really details the story. The other one is more recent. I think he wrote it in the late 80s, put it together. It's Excavation of the Donner Reed Wagons, and he documented, and it's more like an archaeological diary, and it's our provenance, because it shows where most of the stuff we have in the museum, where it was found, and documents it archaeologically. And so those are the two books if you want to study about the Donner Party in Utah. And then I got a copy here of the newest book. There's been about a dozen written about the Donner Party, but this one's called The Indifferent Stars Above.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little more modern take on it. It was a fun read.
Yeah.
They
And-
did a lot of background research on it from the other books and that to,
Yeah.
Go
Well,
for
and
it.
it's probably written for more entertainment value.
some of it's not that entertaining.
Yeah. But,
We even picked up a board game we can play there at the museum.
yeah.
It's called the Donner Dinner Party.
Now, if anyone's not familiar with the Donner Party, it's famous for cannibalism. That when they get stuck in Nevada, right there on the border of Nevada and California, some of the party resorts to cannibalism, and some of the party resorts to being food. But it's famous for that. It's
Infamous is a better term.
infamous. And I would like to do a show on the Donner Party one day, but right now I kind of want to. This show's mostly to advertise the museum. So if you give the old man a call, you go down there and take the tour, and he guides you through the story with actual, relics of that time and everything. And he tells you about the story and different party members. James Reed is one of the most interesting people I've ever heard about, and he's a real life figure, and he's a Indiana Jones action figure. He gets thrown out of the party. He joins a militia. He fights in a war. He comes back. He comes back on the rescue missions. A whole bunch of stuff. Really interesting guy. So yeah, you give him a call down there and set up a tour. If you want to do a tour on a weekend, it's great. On the weekdays, he'll divert you to a number of, I call him the old man posse. He'll divert you to another member of his posse, and they'll meet you down there and do a tour. They do.
They're their chapter members.
Yeah, the other group, they're a gang. Let's face it, they're just they're a civilized gang because they're. But
Our chapter is always looking for new members.
Yeah, and if you want to join their chapter, they meet once a week and
once a month.
Once a month, and tell us about like some of the things they can expect at the chapter, at the meetings.
Oh, we try to have a speaker, usually a historic or a pioneer subject, or we're going to have a speaker the end of September. His name's Ron Rood. He's an archaeologist, and he's going to talk about an archaeological dig they did down in central Utah that concerns, I think, the Black Hawk War.
Mm.
The Black Hawk War, is that an Indian
Mhm.
group?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an Indian war.
Yeah. And they have food.
And we do a lot of potluck dinners. The sons are a little different than the daughters. The wives are very much involved, and so it's we try to have a good time. Again, the COVID has thrown us for a loop. We try to go on a few treks. We've gone out and driven the Pony Express Trail, and we've gone out and driven the Hastings Cutoff Trail. We've gone out and looked at petroglyphs. We went out to Benmore and did a tour of that area with a Benyon from Vernon, who's a professor at BYU, and showed us some of the sites, the original homestead sites and different things, which, that was, he was a polygamist, and his two younger wives weren't getting along too well and with the older wife. So he sent them with a cattle herd out to the sheep rocks, and they said they had to live in a hole in the ground for a couple of years. And
Put them out to pasture.
if the Indians hadn't taken them in, they'd have probably perished.
The younger ones he got rid of?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Sent them with a herd of cattle out there. And, but the town of Benyon was named after him. So
The perils of early man.
but and we tried to do some interesting things as a chapter.
Yeah, I've met all the guys. They're a good bunch of guys. So if you do want to join, definitely join up. Also, they get involved in different events like the honeybee harvest.
Well, they had the honey harvest.
Yeah,
Down
the
at
honey harvest.
at the Clark farm. We were down there with them for a few years, but we were taking a little bit of their room up. So we now are set up. So when they're doing the honey harvest, we have the museum open, and we do this on some holidays also. We got a gentleman that throws tomahawks, and he'll teach you how to throw a tomahawk. And
Yeah.
We've got some fellows in our group that nap arrowheads, and they do some of that, and they give instruction on that sometimes, and demonstrations. And we got a couple of guys that are bona fide mountain men, and we got one that's a fantastic storyteller, and we just try to do things of that nature. Yeah, Jared just brought up that classic picture. There's a museum that was taken in 1928.
Now, is this actually being
That's the
displayed
salt.
right now, Jared?
Yes, it's being displayed right now.
Yeah, that's the
These are wagon
salt
debris.
flats, and anything that's left out there, it creates a dune. And they went out and excavated those dunes in the late 20s. The first party to go out was some guys from Grantsville. Worthington brothers were hired by the people's, I think, church authorities from Salt Lake in 1896 to go bring in a Donner wagon for the Jubilee they held in 97. But they got out there and they came back and they said the wagons were too deteriorated. They couldn't bring a whole wagon in. So they just brought in some wheels. Now, those are still, to my knowledge, in the bottom of the Rio Grande, belonging to the State Historic Society. Someday we'd like to see if we could borrow them. But then in the late 20s, Charles Kelly and the guys from Grantsville went out and excavated several of the dunes and found a lot of artifacts and documented them and brought them in. And that's what we have. And the artifacts themselves tell a story.
Mm.
We've got what's left of 2 rifles and a canteen and water barrels and ox yokes and wagon tongue and pieces of axle and some dishes, china and earthenware. Just things you would leave behind.
Yeah, and there's also artifacts of life 100 years ago.
Yeah.
The dentist chair and
Torture chair.
yeah, the torture chair. The thing I find the most interesting is the hair art, obviously, because that just the delicacy with which they do it. You don't see stuff like that anymore. It's pretty amazing. So if you get the chance, go out there and check it out, and he'll tell you the full story, because we just touched on the beginning. The meat of the story happens once they get around Lake Tahoe, and that's
Truckee Lake.
Truckee Lake, and that's where it really. I mean, it's a story that has been inspiration for movies and stories and ghost stories and everything, and it is, and it's a story. It's an overall story, but it's a story about, when you break it down, about different smaller groups and families and units and the rescue and recovery and sick and twisted people and victims. It's a pretty wild story.
Another little side note, the first Mormons to see the Salt Lake Valley first were traveling with the Harlan Young group. There was a group of Mormons in that wagon train.
Oh, really?
And then there was a Mormon family traveling with the Donner Party.
Hmm.
I think they were Murphys.
Did they plan on staying in
Yes,
the territory, or
they were headed for California.
they were heading through?
I've never found exactly why, but I suspect it was Mrs. Murphy and her 3 daughters and their husbands. And my suspicion is that her husband or somebody that they were close to was in the Mormon battalion.
Hmm.
When they were in Northern California, and she intended to meet up with them. But she didn't make it. Some of her children did, but they said she didn't taste bad. Now, it's reported they labeled the meat, so you didn't eat any relatives if you didn't want to.
Yeah. There's, and yes, the story is kind of morbid, and it does have a happy ending for some, for most actually.
Half.
And but then of course you've got the Reed story in there. He's just, the guy was friends with the president of the United States, reportedly.
He had served with Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, and
he wasn't president yet, but
yeah, he was friends with Lincoln. He was a bold, ambitious man, and his whole family made it.
Yeah.
So-
Another side note: people say, "Well, why didn't they go hang Hastings?" A lot of them really didn't blame Hastings. James Reed, it appears, had business dealings with
Yeah.
him and partnerships in California a few years later.
Yeah.
They wanted to hang him for the cannibalism thing.
No, Hastings for writing the.
for
but-
leading them on that shortcut.
Even then, again, had it not been for, they had when Dad said they stopped and had a funeral in Nebraska, and they were dragging an extra long wagon, that slowed them down. And when you're making a trek that eats up your whole late spring, summer, and fall, time is of the essence. You can't wait until winter sets in, and when they got slowed down, it held them into winter.
Well, some of it was just sheer bad luck,
Yeah.
because the year before in 45, Fremont had crossed over that same pass in late December without much trouble.
Yeah. And wasn't he in kind of a light military group?
Well, yeah, they were just on horseback.
They travel different in
Yeah.
military. You're supposed to starve. So,
But the Donner Party, they were only 3.5 hours from making it over the pass. And
yeah, they were.
one
They
of the
were
lead
right
wagons broke an axle, and they stopped to fix it. And
3.5 hours.
yeah, 3.5 hours. Now they'd have been caught in snow, but they'd have been on the downhill side.
there. Mm-hmm.
And the one George Donner cut his hand real bad, and they patched him up, and they made the decision they'd wait and go over in the morning. Well, it snowed 6 feet that night.
And there's some pictures down there at the museum
and
that
they-
are impressive.
They hung around for a few more days trying to weather the storm and make it through. They even made one attempt to tunnel through some of the drifts and just couldn't do it. If they'd have been more educated on the mountain ways, as soon as the heavy snow hit, they'd have got down out of the mountains into the low country. But as it was, they got trapped.
Mhm.
And the snow where they were trapped at was 18 feet deep.
Wow.
And some drifts were deeper.
Yeah, they've got pictures of the trees that were taken a few years later that still showed evidence of where they cut the trees
Cut the trees
For
off
wood?
at snow level.
at snow level, and they cut them off. It's way up in the air. And granted, we can't go there now and see it. It's 100 years later. It's
Yeah.
They have a new beautiful visitor center. I haven't seen it yet, but there's a new visitor center on Donner Pass.
yeah, we
to the
need
Donner
to.
Party. Sometime I need to get out and see
Yeah,
it. It's fairly new. There's another really nice visitor center on the Oregon Trail that talks a little about the Donner Party, and it's just west of Elko.
so where exactly is Donner Pass?
It's right on the border of California and Nevada.
So
Right
They have
top
to
of the
take a
Sierras.
drive.
And it's the highway goes over it now. Now it wouldn't be used much after that, because in 47, 48, some members of the Mormon Battalion would pioneer a pass about 20 miles south of it. There would be a more doable, better wagon road
Mm-hmm.
that would be used. And Donner Pass wouldn't really become the main road until 69, and the railroad would use that route.
Mm-hmm.
Would go up through what today's Donner Pass. The railroad still goes through it.
So out of my own curiosity, how did they decide who gets to dine and who gets to die?
Well, the first decision was the Indian Scouts.
Well, they believed the first one to be cannibalized. There was a group that called itself the Forlorn Hope. And that about Christmas time, 10 women, 5 men, and 2 Indian employees of Sutter that had been sent with supplies that had met them at the other side of the Carson Desert. And that's what would really save those that were saved, was those supplies. Would make snowshoes out of the ox hoops from the ox yokes and attempt to hike over to Johnson's Ranch, because they were only about 150 miles from where they needed to go. And there was a guy, I believe his name was Greaves, in the group, and he told his daughter, him and his daughter were in that Forlorn Hope, and they'd been out 4 days or so. And he told his daughter,
And granted, they'd been starving for
Yeah, he
for
says-
how long now? A month and a half?
pretty much run out for a while. And he told his daughter, I'm probably going to perish in the night. And if I'm dead in the morning, you're going to need to consume me to survive. And she said in her diaries that that's the toughest thing she ever had to do. and others. Well, and it's the story that was related was they were around the campfire a few nights later discussing who maybe should be next. And they didn't think the two Indian guides could speak English. So they thought, there's no connection to those guys. They'll probably be next. When they got up the next morning, they were gone. They boogied. They fell up. But they caught up to them a day and a half later, and they were sitting in the snow unable to move. And it's believed they were shot in the back of the head and then eaten. And back at camp, there would be the cannibalism start as things run out and people died. And then there's some that they don't think waited for people to die. One fellow, they believe, ate his wife, killed her and ate her, and several children. And they think he killed Temps and Donner. And that was after the second relief party had came and gone.
The relief parties brought food and took some
Not
survivors
a lot, but
out.
some. And took
But-
those that could go out.
But they brought in enough to keep them going. And they had also been successfully hunting at the time.
A few.
So they had food coming in. Now they were spread out over like a 5 miles.
9 miles of the Truckee.
Yeah, the 9 miles of the truck. So it's not like the whole group was huddled together. They were spread out in family units. But the one guy,
Yep.
he liked people. He was a people
Well,
person.
He said he preferred human flesh.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
interesting thing is he went on to run an eatery in California, San Francisco area. And they said he's the only one that would openly speak of the cannibalism.
He started a restaurant.
One of the great epitaphs is a letter that Virginia Reed wrote to a friend in Illinois the next spring. I don't have it verbatim, but basically she said, come out to California. It's beautiful here. There's a lot of fine Mexican men you can find to marry and start a family and have a ranch. She said, though, however, don't take any shortcuts and don't dawdle along the way.
Yeah.
Because, they got to Truckee Lake and they rested there for a whole week before they tried to make the pass.
Yeah.
So if they'd just one day anywhere, would have done it for them. They'd have been on the downhill slope.
Yep. Yeah. It's a daunting story, and it's kind of the stuff of legend. Now, I do know if you go back east, a lot of people don't know this story. But out this way and, out in the Western Territories, they really know it. But we're going to go through some comments real quick. And if anyone has any questions, go ahead and feel free. Punch them into the comments, and we'll ask him directly right now. So first we'll go through Sarah. You remember Sarah from the Ghost Crew?
Yes.
Yeah, she says, great tour, very informative man. And yeah, he is. He is that,
And I tell folks, if I don't know the answer, I'll make something up.
yeah, he'll make it up. So you never know what it'll be next time. And then Christy says, hello, boys. So interesting. And Christy.
Mm-hmm. We also have Grantsville's first jail cell there.
Yeah. Yeah. The jail cell, it's sitting, it's impressive. Call and line up a tour. It's a fun tour. Go out there, get a guzzle, go in and take a walk around, look at all the neat stuff. I would suggest doing it during the spring or the fall. It's the most comfortable time of year to be inside that building.
Well, we have air conditioning in the building now.
It's still the most comfortable time of year. It just feels, yeah. Emily says, very cool.
And the grounds are open all the time. You can wander those anytime you want.
You can, they'll have the buildings closed up, but you can go down there and take a look around. But the tour is what makes it worth it. The good stuff is inside the building. Everything from kind of what early pioneer life looked like, what their beds looked like, and the accoutrement they lived with, all down to there's some.
Got a good collection of Indian artifacts.
Yeah.
Native American, however you want to say it.
There's historic stuff. There is, Amy Adams says, Amy Adams Bryant says a good place for a photo session. Yes. And it's an interesting story. It's really a neat story.
Did the ghost hunters find any ghosts?
I'm not sure yet. We did a ghost hunting tour down there kind of a private one. What, 2 months ago?
About that.
Yeah. And but before we kicked it off, we of course did the tour. And you know, there's some wagons down there. You can go see the wagons. And also when the old man gang gets together, you can go down there and there'll be a guy, like he said, napping, which for those of you who don't know what napping is, that's how they used to make the arrowheads out of flint. And so they break it off. It's really neat to watch. It's
These guys
impressive.
usually use obsidian.
Yeah, flint, obsidian, and one of those.
And the most spectacular now is they find an old television screen
Really?
and make it out of the glass from the television.
They're napping it out of the old tube, huh?
Yeah, a TV screen.
Wow. I'll bet that makes some hard stuff.
And it's got rainbow colors in it.
Ooh,
So it's even pretty.
I might need to learn to nap. That'd be cool. And then, and you know, you can see all the stuff. You can throw the hatchets. You know, if you find a time when they're all down there running, do that. You can call the old man and ask him when their next event down there is, and line it up with that. Or, you know, just give him a call. Go take a tour, and it's always a good tour. I've been on the tour. I don't know. It got to be 100 times now. I used to go on it when I was a kid. Now the old man's taken over. A couple times a summer, I spend time with him down there, and there's usually a tour in on it. Okay, Sarah says we had that one EVP which said "stupid Reed." Huh. So there you go, Dad.
There was one ghost.
Someone called out Reed. And they might have, because maybe he had. When did he get thrown out of the party?
In Nevada.
In Nevada. So, maybe he would have been better at fixing the wagon and getting it moving again, or telling everyone to move on. Maybe. Yeah. And go down and listen just to the story of Jim Reed. I mean, it's an impressive story. He's a pretty impressive guy. Is there anything on YouTube?
He was one of the ones that wanted to push to take the cutoff.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was. So maybe they cursed him for that. Yeah, and he did have dealings with Hastings, and it's also reported that there were some letters from then Senator Lincoln. Wasn't he a senator at the time?
You know, I'm not sure.
I think there were some letters from Senator Lincoln, like maybe introduction letters. Is that YouTube on yours right there?
One of the famous
Not yet.
stories was that they cached a chest of gold and silver coins out on Silver Island.
Yeah, they always
And
leave us.
people always went and looked for it, but there's strong indication that they sent some folks the next spring after that chest,
Yeah.
and it was retrieved.
Oh, okay.
You don't leave a chest of gold and silver.
No, not unless everyone's eating.
Yeah.
You know, the last two guys sitting around eating each other, I guess.
But,
Yeah, you don't. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stories of gold and silver stashed in Utah.
They had an old story. Cowboy Bob, if you knew him, he liked to tell it and talk about it, of a cache of loot out to Conde Meadows.
Mm.
Well, about 10, 12 years ago, a couple of guys after spring runoff and that found it
Really?
and turned it up. Guess what?
What?
Still belongs to Wells Fargo.
Then you don't. You find it and keep your mouth shut.
Well, so they had to turn it over to Wells Fargo. They got a finder's fee.
Yeah. How much was the finder's
I
fee?
do not know, but it wasn't the whole thing.
Yeah, you
So-
can't be
So the
quiet.
moral of the story is, keep your
Keep your mouth
business
shut.
to yourself.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a friend of mine was at his office and laid
Sell
to
it
work
on the
for him,
dark web.
come in and put a big sack of money on the table on his desk and said, it was marked Brinks. And she says, I found this on the side of the road. What do I do with it? He looked at her and told her, well, now that you've showed it to me, we have to turn it in.
Yeah. 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 Anyways,
They'd left it on the back bumper of their truck and it had just fallen off.
that is fantastic. So we've got 8 minutes left on the show. I wanted to finish the show off, and I'm sure Dave agrees, and I'm sure the old man does too. I want to, right now, with the stuff going on in Afghanistan, I want to kind of send a message to the veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq, and I know that you're probably feeling a lot of betrayal, and feeling like you suffered a lot, and you did suffer a lot, and maybe there is some betrayal. That's not for me to judge, but you guys did honorable over there, and you guys did good, and you fought for the guys next to you, and that's what really mattered. So if you're feeling any remorse or a touch of pressure and you need to reach out to someone, please do. Please, seek, if it's a friend or a family member or one of your comrade at arms, or anyone you feel. If you want to send me a message, send me a message. But I don't think you guys have anything to feel ashamed of. You were let down by our government. You were failed by false promises from our government, and it was nothing you did or any of that. And I don't know. Do you guys have anything to say about it?
I just don't think the service that our servicemen performed for the Republic is not well reflected by the population who voted in this government.
Yeah.
I'm very disappointed in the population for allowing this government to seize power and destroy what we have built and what opportunity we had to establish a fantastic new republic in Afghanistan, if it could have even have been possible with that type of people. But in essence, we didn't even allow the possibility to happen when we pulled out.
Yeah, it may not have been possible. They may have fell apart anyway, but I think that our government has failed in the way they maneuvered this exit from Afghanistan. Not just me think that it's not just my thoughts, but our allies are saying the same thing. And it's not your soldiers, airmen, sailors, Marines, you guys performed exemplary over there. And I know you guys have seen and sacrificed stuff that you shouldn't have, but don't internalize this if you can. It's not a failure on your part.
I'd just say with the current leadership, I wouldn't have expected much else.
Yeah,
It troubles me that they want to bring a lot of it here.
yeah.
And that's for another show. I am doing some research on what we are going to be taking in as Utah. I've reached out to the different immigration groups that help assist the housing and support the immigrants that come into Utah. And hopefully they'll get back to me. And if I do have information on that I can feel pretty confident is actual factual information, I will be sharing it. And maybe we can even make a show of it.
Yeah. We'll try to get some interviews in the future having to do with this. Right now we're working on Black Hammers of Utah. We have Mayor Wynn on the 10th of next month. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then we have a Mitchell coming in. He's running for Senate from Utah. He's a Democrat, so we're going to have a sit down with him, have him lay out his message. One of his talking points is he wants to protect the people from the government. I would like to see him drive down on that some more. And
and just so for clarification, this individual is running against Romney, right?
Man, that'd be a tough run.
No, it'll probably against Lee.
Yeah.
Likely.
Lee.
Okay.
There'll be a whole bunch of Republicans running against Romney, of which he's not, you know.
Well, I mean, Sarah says, thank you for all your service to all you veterans out there. And yes, thank you. Again, you guys performed your task exemplary, and I, you know, I joined the Army too when I was young, and I understand the thoughts going in and the thoughts coming out. Obviously, I didn't serve in any situation near to what you guys did, and hopefully resources are made available to you to help you out if you need it. And yeah, I hope. I don't know. I think we're not done seeing what unfolds in Afghanistan. I think we're going to see it's going to get a lot different than what we even expect. But yeah, thanks for joining us, Dad. Thanks for coming on, everyone.
It's a pleasure. We've had people from all over the world come and visit our museum.
Yeah, there's a guy that comes out every couple of years from the Netherlands. Does a little.
Yeah, we took him on a ride out across the desert
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't feel good sending him out there in a rent-a-car.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to give out the old man's cell phone number. His number is.
Well, my home phone should be kicked over to the cell phone too, so you can get them both.
Okay. Well, his home phone number is 435-884-3259. And his cell phone is 435-841-7174. And if you want to take a tour, go out there and have the full shebang. And right now is the perfect time of year for it. When it's not too hot, it's nice, because the reason inside the building during the hot summer, it's nice. But remember, there's two other outbuildings that aren't near as comfortable as AC. But right now it's perfect to walk through all three buildings, to take the tour, to sit out by the wagons and finish off some stories and ask some questions. But give him a call, take a tour, and you know, it's really a good show. A good tour, a good, I don't know. I'm thankful that these guys have kept it up. I mean, they've put in the effort to have the building worked on, to organize it, to get stuff behind glass. It used to be kind of cluttered in there, and these guys keep working on it and keep making it a much better presentation. All right, everyone, have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.